Now for global business updates, Rotus Oddiri joins us. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, Dr. Abasi. Good morning, Vimbai. Good morning, Rufai. It's a rainy day here in Lagos, and with expected higher amounts of rainfall in September, that's not going to bode well for the flood-affected areas in the country. But we begin with oil prices, and they've been steady as she goes. A bit of a drop, but still in the low $70 range. You've got the Federal Reserve expected rate decision that is going to oil traders are looking for. If you cut rates, you pretty much stimulate aggregate demand because you're making things cheaper. So they're expecting that is going to be a factor. Also, they're looking at inventory drawdowns in the U.S. And then three, this attack that happened in Hezbollah. Traders are saying, okay, if there's going to be a retaliation, what's that going to do? But oil prices, we haven't seen them move that much. Also, Asian stocks, it's the same story. Looking forward to what's going to happen in the U.S. later on today. Mainland China is back. Been closed for the last couple of days due to a festival and holidays and so on. But you see the Shanghai Composite Index up by 64 basis points. Nikkei 225 in Japan up as well, earlier trading. The Nifty in India and also in Australia, ASX S&P 200 also up as well. We got exports or trade figures from Japan earlier this morning. They did disappoint the markets. They were expecting higher, but remember, we were talking about how the yen has gotten a lot stronger. So with Japan being an export-oriented nation, a stronger yen does make exports more expensive. But you look at exports there, we converted it from yen, I think it was like 84 trillion yen or so, about $59.2 billion. I mean, that is, think about that, that is just 1 month, almost 60 billion delicious dollars worth of exports for Japan. 5.6% year-on-year rise. However, in July it was double digits, so it did slow. You see imports there at 64.1 billion, giving Japan a deficit of 4.9 billion. And the forecast is that, look, if you see China slowing down, worries over the U.S. economy, the two largest trading partners of Japan, there are worries that Japan's trade figures could actually trend lower as we close out the year. But then Christmas is coming up soon, right? So there might be an uptick. All right, you've already shown, I just do want to get into this because a lot of traders are talking about this attack that happened, cybersecurity discussions. I think you've already showed the images, but just take a look. Viewer discretion advised for this explosion. This gentleman that was in a supermarket where that pager exploded in Lebanon. So I heard, Dr. Abasi talking about technology earlier. Remember in February, Hezbollah leaders said don't use mobile phones anymore because they're being tracked by Israeli forces. So they've gone back to, pagers are things from the 1990s, right? Surprised anybody still uses them. But that's what they've been using. You've already gone over the fact that so far 9 people have been killed and about almost 3,000 people that have been injured. But folks have been asking, how was this possible by, Israeli? Well, again, Israel has not commented, but again, it is suspected that it's Israel. How did they do it? Did they detonate it from, somewhere from a distance, or was there a supply chain attack? So there are a couple cybersecurity experts that spoke on this. The first one is from Professor Tony Ingeson. He used to be a former bomb disposal expert with the Swedish Armed Forces. He's a professor now in a public school in Sweden. He says the footage I've seen indicates an explosive substance of some sort, a very small charge enough to injure someone. You don't need much. The advantage here is it's a device people will carry on their person. Then we get to Ken Monroe. He is the founder of Penn Test Partners. They're a security outfit as well. And he says, I'm leaning hard towards a supply chain attack, as to remotely cause a battery to explode in such a fashion would be extremely challenging. So the supply chain attack people are talking about is that they're saying that, again, Israel allegedly intercepted a shipment of those pagers apparently coming from Taiwan. And so it gets further now, because there's a quote from the founder of a company called Good Apollo. Good Apollo is apparently the manufacturer of these pagers, and they're located in Taipei in Taiwan. So, reporters immediately went to his office, and the gentleman, Hugh Ching Kwan, who is the founder and the president, he said the product was not ours. It was only that it's had our brand on it. So apparently they licensed the brand out. He says, we only provide brand trademark authorization, and we have no involvement in the design or manufacturing of this product. So, again, the story now that is forming, is that the Israelis were somehow able to intercept the shipment, plant the explosive, seal it back up, and then get it delivered over to the folks in Lebanon. And there's a map showing the extent to which this attacks. So you can actually see this spreading into Damascus, actually into Syria. So the red points there, hopefully you have the Lebanon map there. Beirut, of course, Bekaa, Western Bekaa, Saw, Saida. It's pretty extensive. And so it's, again, oil prices didn't react much, but then traders are nervous that if there is a blowback, this could extend further. To the United States, it's the talk of the town. I'm actually quite surprised. The markets are forecasting a 50 basis points cut from the Federal Reserve. The narrative is that somehow the Fed has been behind the curve in trying to keep up with inflation, and so this 50 basis point cut is supposed to somehow overcompensate for that. I am expecting 25 basis points.
Are presently in, supported by full-blown harvest season, having adjusted our model for reported cases of flooding as it's raining right now, and lesser than average harvest in some states, we expect food inflation to decelerate by 11 basis points to 37.4. And then furthermore, they continued on the PMS part. They say, furthermore, the pass-through effect of higher PMS prices is unlikely to be pronounced on food inflation, as most agro-machineries and trucks for logistics are mostly diesel-powered. Overall, we expect headline inflation to increase by 15 basis points to 2.3. And again, that's cardinal stone. We also had Ibuku Omoyeni, Sub-Saharan Africa economist with Vectiva Capital Management. Here's a clip of what he said. He was along the same lines as well.
There's a possibility that we might begin to see that effect, but it's still very open.
Yeah.
It's very possible that we can see inflation rise in September. So there's going to be a lot of controversy around where inflation is going to fall.
Yeah.
But if it falls, it's still in line with prediction that the harvest season is bringing food inflation down. And don't forget that this food, the factors it reacted to in February, March, April was not PMS price.
Right.
It was sales of food to neighboring countries, huge off-takers buying up our food, and because of our weak naira, right, our exports are cheaper. So a lot of our Greek exports were going to neighboring countries, and we saw some state governors clamp down on that by introducing a blockade. We didn't understand what that story was about then, but it was more about those food exports that was hindering local consumption. And now that we are seeing the harvest season come to play, it's very possible that it might totally override the impact of the PMS hike.
All right, I think one of the biggest stories in the country today should be that story coming out of CBN in one of their reports that's saying that the removal of subsidy has affected us so much now that it's already affecting our reserves. And they talked about, importation bill and a couple of other things, but they talked about removal of subsidy. And that story is very apt because it's against the lies that they told us, government supported by Bretton Woods people told us that removal of subsidy was going to fix it. And like I always say, there was an interview with Julius Nyerere, and I'm going to quote a book that is soon going to be out, Encounter with World Leaders, written by Yemi Ogubi, former head of, what's it called, the Daily Times, former chief of the Daily Times, where he interviewed Julius Nyerere in the 80s. And Nyerere was complaining about the IMF, saying that constantly, the only solution IMF knows to any problem is removal of subsidy. But they do not know that it's a solution that will kill some economies. And how they had to go against IMF. This was Nyerere of Tanzania talking about this in the 80s. So the CBN now also revealing in their report that the removal of subsidies also impacted their reserves. And it speaks volumes. This is the same IMF that kept on pushing for us to remove subsidies. Then the other day, the IMF, I think Mr. Ebeke, was saying that they should also remember human face in their policies. The IMF does not love the suffering people of this country. Because if you truly care about them, yes, we know there are a lot of corruption going on. We know that you want to bring sanity to the system, like removal of subsidies. But the truth is, when you remove those, it kills the people you want to save. And that's why I go against all these arguments where they keep talking about, we are going to reinvest it in other areas of the economy. In already a warped system where there's lack of productivity, where there's lack of accountability. Didn't they earmark money for the Allow Dam? What happened? Lack of accountability. Didn't they put money out for the ecological funds? So these are the problems we keep talking about in this country, and those were, I think, about the biggest country as regards that CBN report, stories in the land. Another story I want to talk about is the story of, what is happening now as regards Israel. The level of technology Israel has been able to use to attack Hezbollah. Definitely, there's been a war going on the Hezbollah front all this while, but it's just been skirmishes here and there, rocket hits and all of that. And like you have said, Radley, the destabilization of this war front might lead to the Third World War if it's not handled properly, and also the one that's happening on the Russo-Ukrainian front. For the very first time, the world is just so depressed with a lot of wars. We are fighting across many fronts. We are not even talking about the ones that is happening in Africa here in Sudan with the Dagalos of this world and all of that. Ethiopia too has been fighting with Eritrea. They just settled that the other day. I mean, it's still hot in some areas in that country. So too many war fronts will definitely cause a very big problem. And that's why, how can we cool these things down? One, for the market, and two, for the ecosystem. Definitely, I am not surprised that the market is bullish about 50 basis points, for reduction of interest rates in America, because inflation has come down. We are seeing a deceleration, but like you normally will make your argument, it's not still reflecting on the cost of living. Yes, the candidates also still talk about it, but increasing those costs are coming down. It's how they can, reduce it equally. And that's why the Inflation Reduction Act did some work as also helping. So I see people are bullish. Why don't you just, cut those rates so much?
I'm very curious about the report regarding food harvests and the impact of food harvests in Nigeria being able to negate the PMS, or rather the word used was override the hike in the cost of PMS. And I saw some of the justification being that, well, the vehicles that bring harvest from farm to market and to table and so forth are diesel powered and so forth. I'm very confused about the report, and that's why I said I'm curious about it, because our problem has never really been about harvest or the actual farming of food. Our issues are insecurity. Our issues are poor infrastructure. Now we are contending with, we can argue that it's climate change, but a lot of it is negligence. We're dealing with the fact that thousands of hectares of arable farmland were destroyed last week. Just in the past 2 weeks alone, how many thousands of hectares of productive farmland has been destroyed by preventable flooding? Of course, there's also been weather forecasts about heavy rains that are setting in. Here in Lagos, it has started raining, I believe, across the nation. This week, there's forecast to be heavy rains. Rufai earlier mentioned the Lagdo Dam. That's also is always released at this time of the year. So that's also coming up. Are we prepared for it? So I'm curious. That's why I say that I can't dismiss it, because I haven't looked at all of the data that has been used to present this argument. But I mean, petrol that has gone from, even if we just take it from 198, let's go from 198 to about 1,000 naira now. My mathematics, if I'm not mistaken, tells me how many percent is that? That's 1,000%, I believe, will be overtaken by food harvests. I'm curious to know, what type of bumper crop we're expecting when we know the challenges that are bedeviling the agricultural sector right now. So I would have loved to know more about that. And then, of course, on the issue of the pages, I know that a number of manufacturers have been named, but nothing official, just a lot of chatter. However, I think for me, the big conversation there is the fact that this is a strategy that has been used historically. In the 1970s, I believe Mossad took out a member of the PLO in France. By then it was a landline, but they were able to put explosives. So when he answered the phone to pick up a call, I believe that was in Paris, the phone exploded. exploded. And later on, I believe there was another similar attack in the 90s. So this is a familiar war strategy that has been used. Is it a time of war? That's what we now ask ourselves, is that, yes, we know Gaza is at war, but we're now asking ourselves, can we officially declare that we are now in a time of war that goes beyond what has been happening on the war front, specifically in Gaza?
Okay, let me deal very quickly with the issue of the central banks. Now, today at 2 o'clock Eastern Time, the Federal Reserve is going to issue a press statement. At 2:30 p.m., Jerome Powell is going to hold a press conference. And we will know the issue is not about whether there will be a cut. The issue is by how much. And nobody is certain. The markets are expecting not 50 basis points, maybe 25 basis points. But it remains a mystery until we hear from the Federal Reserve whether it's 25, a quarter point, or a half point. But whatever it is, from a political angle, what are the implications? One, the expectation is that if there is a rate cut, that will help, the Democrats. Although Jerome Powell keeps saying they are not interested in politics. They are interested in what the data says. And in any case, this is election year, so you cannot blame people if they read, political interpretations into what comes up, this afternoon. The other issue, of course, is that other markets will be affected, particularly markets that are attached to the dollar, like in Hong Kong, in some of the Gulf countries. And domestically, there will be implications for mortgage, for rent. But what we know is that the labor market in the U.S. has been cooling, but the economy is good. It's in a good place. It's just not as robust as it was before. Two things, the dot plot. What would, the Federal Reserve be saying about the dot plot, which is the projection for the immediate future? And then what will be the rate cut, the percentage, which was the first thing that I deal with. But, let's keep our fingers crossed. The second issue, you talked about oil. Well, last week, there was the Asia-Pacific, Petroleum Conference in Singapore. And at that conference, there was a lot of concern about how oil is doing in the face of the fact that the Chinese economy is spluttering. Now, China is the main engine driving oil consumption, and demand has gone down there. The demand is tepid. Now, Goldman Sachs came out with a report, projection for 2025, 2026, and they are saying that oil is going to go down to about the low $60 range. Or even go as far down as $50. However, it's not all bad news with oil, as I saw in the reports. India, there is hope that India, the third fastest growing, largest economy, could provide some hope. India consumes about 5% of global oil demand. And so the conclusion is that it will not go bust. It may go stagnant, but even when oil is stagnant, I guess that's bad news for countries like Nigeria that depend on oil. For the Central Bank of Nigeria, there was some story yesterday that the Central Bank governor had been advised to resign. But I think it was Mr. Bayo Ononuga who said, no, the story is not true. Now, there's a lot of rumor mongering, scaremongering in this environment. Certainly, it will not be in the interest of the Tinubu administration to put a former central bank governor on trial, and then within a year to have another central bank governor and then say he should resign. In other countries, they don't joke with that office in that manner. So the clarification that has been offered is useful. Thank you, Rotus.